Hi everyone, Todd Norris here. Well, I think we can safely say that fall is well entrenched here in southern Ontario, Canada. And as you can see behind me, most of the leaves have turned their fall colors, such as this white oak. And most of the leaves actually on the farm here have fallen now. We're probably about 70% leaf fall now on the ground. And there's a cold nip in the air most days now. We've had a few nights down into the freezing level or below, so this really helps get the feeling of autumn. Anyhow, I thought it was a good time to consider setting up the bird feeders for another winter season. This type of weather always brings those thoughts to mind for sure. And I thought in this video I'd like to just go over some of the basic aspects of feeding birds for the winter, types of feeders to use, types of food to use, where to put your feeders, what types of bird interactions or birds you might see as well at your feeders, and just all the different aspects of feeding birds for the winter. I hope this might be useful to people just starting out with feeding birds, or even for people who've fed birds for a long time. I'm hoping you'll find something of use in this video, and I think it can be a lot of fun. It's very entertaining to watch the birds, and especially now when a lot of people are home during the COVID pandemic. It's a fun hobby to have going. You can sit in your house and watch them, or you can walk around your yard and watch the birds and feel that you're helping them in a small way too, to help them make it through the tougher weather during the winter period. When we talk about feeders or feeder design, there's four main types that you might see in common use throughout the winter feeding period. Of course, we also have things like hummingbird feeders in the summer, but I'm not really going to discuss those today. This is mainly a video about feeding the birds in the winter. Anyhow, there's four main types. There's tray or platform feeders, which this is one of that type. There's a type known as hopper feeders. There's a type known as tube feeders, and a type known as suet feeders, just as far as the main types are concerned. Tray and platform feeders are, as the name suggests, often simply a platform, like a base with some edges on it. It can have also roof attached to it with sides. So these are typically some of the simplest feeders to have around your yard. And you can build them yourself, such as this one I made a few years back, just out of 1 by 1 inch thick lumber, rough cut lumber, white pine. And fairly simple design. It's about 2 feet long or 2.5 feet long, and a foot or so wide, with 4 edges and a couple ends, and a roof. And then you just put the food in here, and it does very well for attracting large and small birds, and a few birds can sit on here at one time because it is fairly large. The tray holds quite a bit of food, so it'll last for quite a while before you have to refill it. And this one I've put on a post here. I'll show it to you now, just how that was done. So as I pan down here, you can see it was it's put on a 4x4 post with these bottom cross members of 2x4s on, just to hold it in a steady position. But the beauty of this design is you can move it around your yard if you want to. This feeder also can be removed. So I've got it put into a little bracket here that I can just take it out of if I want to clean it or modify it in some way, and then it just slips back in, and it's quite steady in the wind. This windy day today, and it's a heavy structure. So anyhow, that's one type of tray or platform feeder. Here's another type of tray or platform feeder. So you can see this has actually 2 trays involved in the feeder design. It's basically just two end pieces of pine cut into a nice curvy shape for attractive qualities. Has a roof made out of a few different pieces of wood, and then the two trays, which are basically a foot square, are just four edges of wood with a bottom of perforated metal. You might be able to see it here if I hold it up. The perforated metal allows water to drain out the bottom, which is a good thing. The trays are fairly deep, about 1.5 inches deep, so they hold a fair amount of food. This allows a number of birds again to feed in the two different trays at once, or you might have a squirrel feeding here and birds somewhere else. So it's a nice design. I really like it. The roof primarily protects the top tray, but then this tray also helps protect this tray. But I picked this up at a flea market a few years ago. It's gotten a little bit of damage and wear on it, but I really like the design. I'm thinking of actually building another one myself. It's fairly simple and in its design. Here's an example of one of the other types of feeders I was talking about earlier. This is the hopper feeder, and what a hopper feeder is basically a feeder that has typically two glass sides or plexiglass sandwiched between the two ends of the feeder, and then a tray at the bottom to hold the seeds as they come out of here. So the advantage of this kind of feeder is you can open the hinge top, fill up this large area with seeds, and then the seeds fall out the bottom here. There's a gap between the glass bottom and the top of the tray, so the seeds naturally fall out. You want to have that gap to be at least 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch to allow free flow of seeds as large as sunflower seeds or perhaps even cracked peanuts. Sometimes a lot of feeders, they don't provide a big enough gap at the bottom for different types of seeds to fall out, and that's a major flaw I've seen with a lot of the cheaper commercial plastic or even the metal feeders that you often buy. They'll often have like a 1/4 inch gap or 1/8 inch gap, and it's not big enough for a lot of the seed types to fall out of. The beauty of this thing is you can fill it up with maybe 10 pounds of seed. This one's a pretty large one. Now you can build these in any size. You can have them in or buy them in different sizes from like 7 or 8 inches long to 2 or 3 feet long. This one's about 1.5 feet in length and about 7 inches wide at the base, widening out at the top to about 8 inches. So this holds about 10 pounds of seeds, so you don't have to fill it up very often. It's a really nice design. Again, I've put this one on a solid post, just using a couple brackets of 2x8 wood here to hold it. So this one's permanently positioned with screws, but I could take it off if I wanted to. It's actually getting pretty rough now. It's time to probably build a new one. This one's been out here for 10 or more years now. Here's another example of a tray or platform feeder, similar to a couple of the others I showed, but this is one that just hangs from a tree branch or from a plant hook like I have attached here, just for display purposes. Again, this is an old weather-beaten one, but basically a simple bottom tray with a couple ends. These ones have been cut out. I kind of like this design because it allows birds to come in from the end here too if they want, or to fly out if they need to get out quick. Shingled type roof just out of small pieces of wood, and basically a cross member here at the top, and perforated metal in the bottom here. It's getting pretty rusted up, but that's a basic hanging platform feeder. Now the simplest platform feeders would be simply just a tray, and they usually they can be placed on the ground for ground feeding birds, or they can be put on the side of a building with a bracket of wood just to hold them flat out from the side of a building. Ideally they would have a roof overhang over them, because if it's a simple tray out in the open, they tend to get filled with snow pretty rapidly. Anyhow, this is just a very simple, easy to build type if you'd like to build your own bird feeder. Personally, I find it very rewarding to build my own feeders. They're fairly simple, and you can build it any way you want it, which is nice. This one's just hung up with a piece of rope that goes through holes in the roof. So it's all, you can find designs for these all over the internet. So lots to choose from out there. Another of the main types of feeders is known as the tube feeder, or the distal finch feeder, or the Niger seed feeder, whatever you want to call it. These are primarily made out of a plastic tube, fairly thin. They can range from a foot in length to 2 or 3 feet, and they can be a few inches wide to even 4 or 5 inches wide, depending on how much seed you want to put in. They have a few feeding ports ranging from 3 or 4 to 6 or 7. If it's a long tube, they may have 10 feeding ports. They can hang up here like on this plant hook, and then the top opens up to put the seeds in. And sorry for the look of this one. Most of these feeders are fairly dusty. They've been in the barn for the winter or for the summer. Still have some of the dust from the seed last winter too. They need to be flushed out before I use them. Anyhow, so this is a feeder that typically is used a lot for feeding finches, gold finches, purple finches, depending on the food type you put in here. If it's just Niger seed, which the finches love, then you'll primarily get finches. But if you put mixed feed in here that includes sunflower seeds, millet, Niger seed, peanuts, that type of thing, cracked open shelled peanuts, then you can get things like nuthatches and other birds, chickadees coming here as well. But if it's primarily Niger seed you're using in here, which is a small thin thistle seed, basically is what Niger seed is, then you'll primarily get finches of various types, pine siskins, red poles, goldfinches, purple finches, those types of things coming. It's a useful feeder to have in addition to your more typical platform type feeders. Anyone who's feeding birds in a big way almost always has at least one of these types of feeders. Now this may not look like a tube feeder, but in essence it is. It's actually an octagonal plastic feeder with, again, 12 feeding ports in this case. It has a top that comes off to fill the seeds, and then little perches for the birds to land on. This one's quite rough. It's probably on its last days. That's one of the problems with plastic for a bird feeder, is they tend not to last that long if they're left out in the sun, especially if you leave them hanging out in the summer. They tend to get broken and whatnot, and the squirrels chew them. So it's always best to have feeders that are built in with the most lasting materials. But this has been a good feeder. You can get this, I think, all over North America or something similar to it. It's been a really good feeder it enables a lot of birds to feed here. Usually, again, the finch-like small finches and birds like that. Like you'll see all of these being sat on at one time, oftentimes with those smaller birds. And again, this one I typically fill up just with black oil sunflower seed.